On 27 March, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delayed the controversial judicial reform that had led to unprecedented mass protests in Israel.
אנחנו עומדים על הצורך להביא את התיקונים הנחוצים במערכת המשפט וניתן הזדמנות כדי להשיג אותם בהסכמה רחבה. זו מטרה ראויה מאין כמוה. ולכן מתוך אחריות לאומית, מתוך הרצון למנוע את הקרע בעם, החלטתי להשהות בהי את הקריאה השנייה והשלישית של החוק במושב הזה של הכנסת.
The decision came after tens of thousands of Israelis protested in different parts of the country. Nationwide strikes were called by labor groups and plans were opposed by ministers of Netanyahu's government itself. But why Israel faced such a massive protest? What was so controversial about the judicial reform and why Netanyahu had to bow down? Let's check out. But first, please like, share, comment on the video and don't forget to subscribe to the Moneycontrol YouTube channel. The judicial reform was a series of proposed changes to the Israeli judicial system and the balance of power in Israel. Now, through the reform, the government were proposing several changes. First, the Israeli parliament will need a simple majority of 61 in the 120-seat parliament to overrule almost any ruling of the Supreme Court. Second, increase politicians' representation in the independent committee for selecting judges. This will give the government a decisive say in appointing judges, including the Supreme Court. As per reports, the reform also proposes to remove the Supreme Court's authority to review the legality of Israel's basic law, which functions as the country's constitution. And let me tell you, these changes were not led by Prime Minister Netanyahu. In fact, they were spearheaded by Netanyahu's party colleague Yariv Levin, the Justice Minister, and MK Smicha Rothman, the religious Zionist who chairs the Israeli Parliament Law and Justice Committee. The critics believe that the reform will weaken the judicial system, which has historically kept a check on the government's use of power. Overall, it will weaken the democracy of the country.
We're here to protest. We feel that we have no other way. This has to be stopped. This Prime Minister is not qualified anymore.
Critics also pointed out that the reform will protect Prime Minister Netanyahu, who is facing a trial for alleged corruption. On the other hand, Netanyahu and the reform supporters argued that the Supreme Court has become an insular and elitist group that does not represent the Israelis. They further argued that the Supreme Court has overstepped its role, getting into issues it should not rule on. One thing to note here is that the Supreme Court is the only one that can check the Israeli parliament's power. That is because Israel does not have a written constitution. Instead, it only has a set of quasi-constitutional basic laws, making the Supreme Court even more powerful. Hence, the Israeli believes implementing the reform will weaken the judiciary and turn the country into autocracy.
I will continue protesting until these reforms are completely dropped, because this isn't a set of reforms. This is a coup by the executive.
Since the start of 2023, not just the general public, political rivals and labor groups have been protesting against the reform. Even a growing number of military reservists protested by refusing to report for duty. Thus, it triggered warnings that the crisis could threaten Israel's security. On the other hand, Prime Minister Netanyahu was also facing pressure from his coalition parties, without whose support the government would collapse. The far-right ministers believed the reform should be passed and not watered down. Tension rose further when the Israeli defense minister was fired after the minister called Netanyahu to halt the reform on the television. Demonstrations were held outside parliament and outside of the Prime Minister's official residence. Due to the growing pressure, Prime Minister Netanyahu finally agreed to delay the reform and called for an attempt to achieve broader consensus. The delay means the bill will not be put to vote in the parliament until the end of April 2023. Moneycontrol will keep tracking the story and will surely give you the update.